Greetings, beloveds. This is Amy Caryn Johnson, the Earth Channel, with another message from Gaia. Today, I'll talk about the Ajna, or the third eye chakra, also the center in human design that deals with our mind and our senses that are associated with the head, eyes, ears, that kind of thing. But first, I have a poem for you. Have you ever been lit up, but didn't know by what? This is the time to use the mind, to observe. When you move, do you get hotter or colder? What do you see when you get warmer, closer? Take a sec, find the click that is right. Write it down, draw it up, what you see and what you feel. What makes it show? What makes it grow? Follow through. So the third eye, and specifically the Ajna center, as it is spoken of in human design. It is the triangular shaped center above the throat, which we spoke about last week. Excuse me, still clearing out a lot of collective stuck energy in those areas. Every time I talk about it. Excuse me, I'll get a little water, and I encourage you all to hydrate as well. By the way, we are on the 8th of 9 reports within this series. So next week will be the last one, and then we'll be moving on to talking more, I think, about relationships and astrology. So this Ajna center in human design, like I said, is associated with the third eye chakra, and yet it encompasses just a little bit more, like I said, the mind, the senses, sight and hearing at least. And if you need to run your chart, as I always say, I usually recommend humandesignamerica.com/chart, but you can find lots of free chart creators, and I am not affiliated with that one. It was defined for everyone by the transiting planets for a large part of last year. So if you went into the circumstances of the pandemic with a relatively narrow mindset, you had sort of the same effect as a lot of people who have that center defined, which isn't the majority of the population. The majority of us have it open. However, a lot of us had it defined last year, and if we had a narrow mindset that we had already adopted before we went into lockdown, all these different measures to prevent the spread of COVID, whatever your views may be on that, you may have struggled more with adapting to what was needed for that time. It was a brand new situation for a lot of us, most of us. Of course, if you were in Asia, you have already dealt with that, and you have already, come to the solutions that you needed for those things before that time. But for us in the West, in particular, where it really hit hard in 2020, you may have struggled a lot, especially in the realms of money and communication. So a defined Ajna tends to make you have a very consistent access to certain points of view. And I use that term intentionally, view being associated with our sight, whether that is our physical sight or the way we see things in our minds, which you can scarcely separate those two things. If you had a wider mindset, one that was able to encompass and embrace lots of different possibilities, including change, you might have done fairly well through last year. For myself, my Ajna is typically open. That doesn't mean I've never been stuck in certain mindsets. But at this point in my life, I have a fairly broad mindset that allows me to do a lot of self-reflection and see what is needed for growth based on new situations without pointing fingers, blaming others, arguing about how things should be handled differently, that kind of thing. It was also an election year in the US, and I know that that brought about a lot of polarization. I posted about this on my group earlier this week, polarization. And one of the things that Mother Earth wants to share about that is that she too has two poles, the North Pole, South Pole. She is polarized, and yet she is her whole self. She doesn't favor the North Pole or the South Pole or the North Hemisphere or the Southern Hemisphere. We recognize that by virtue of having one pole, if we are embracing our whole self, we recognize that we have the other pole within us as well, as a being. And we have that electromagnetic field generated by our heart, generated by our whole being, that does have those two poles. One is receptive, one is generative. And so to really be whole and be healthy, those two words have the same root in etymology. We really must not only create energy and put those thoughts out there, but we must also be able and willing to receive in order to have that come back to us, have that energy come back to us, have our good things come back to us, goodness, and those things that we wish to manifest in the world. The other thing that Mother Earth wants to share before we get to our meditation with her is that the purpose of the mind is not to generate those wishes, those creative impulses. It is to observe. And human design speaks about this a little bit. It helps us to see how things are supposed to work. So the sacral center is what makes people generator types. If you have run your chart and you happen to be a generator type, more than 2/3 of us are generator types, either generators or manifesting generators. But even if you don't have that center defined, you still have access to that generative energy the more you open yourself up and connect with the world, with Mother Earth, Gaia, even with Source, of course, of the entire multiverse. And so what is needed for that is for us to look and see what we are aligning with. What are we getting a yes to from that sacral center in terms of what we have energy to pursue and what we have energy to sustain, work upon. The other part of that is the emotional center. It's the center that is undergoing the most evolution right now. Human design speaks about that as well. And so not only do we need to listen to whether it's a yes or a no in terms of our energy, but we also need to pay attention to how those things make us feel. If we are feeling down, that's not necessarily the time to move forward. If we are feeling up, that may not be the time to move forward either. We need to see what brings us to a state of peace, more of an equilibrium, more of a point of clarity. And it's not to say that we can't feel more sustained joy and pleasure. We can. But there are only certain things that are going to do that for the length of time needed to engage in certain things. So pay attention to how things make you feel, and then use your mind to imagine what might make it better, or what it is. Observe with your mind what it is about that thing that you're either thinking of or experiencing in the moment that makes it such a yes, or makes you feel so wonderful, makes you feel so joyful. What is it about it that is so great? And what is it about that situation that if you took that part away, would it sort of ruin it? Would it make it something that you no longer want to participate in, something that you no longer want to work on? So that is the purpose of the mind, not to figure things out. When we figure things out, when we get set in a very narrow mindset in our minds, we lose touch with how we feel about things, and we lose touch with that energy that is our real power. And we do get energy from other sources as well. The root and the will center as well can be generative. They're not typically as sustaining as the sacral, but not all things need to be worked on forever and ever or for long periods of time. So pay attention to the energy that comes from those as well. For now, let's get into our meditation with Gaia, and let's see what she has to share with us specifically about our third eye chakras and our minds. So I'll invite you to take a few deep breaths with me. And now let's just observe, look into our own minds, observe our thoughts. There's no need to push our thoughts away, but there is a need to really pay attention to what we are thinking. Pay attention to when we were trying to put all our energy up there in our heads. And pay attention to how that feels. For me, I know it feels like I'm overextending myself. It feels better when I ground. It feels better when I get fully into my whole body. And I have more energy when I listen to my body and not just the observations of my mind. Not just my sight, what I see, not just what I hear, but when I pay attention to my feelings. Sometimes the mind can be a place where we go to escape our feelings. But we can't ever really escape our feelings. The only way out is through. Our feelings can be like little children, even us as our inner child. And those children, that child needs to be loved. That's the only way that child will stop crying for our attention, is when they feel the love, feel the support that they need. So just do that for your inner child. Hold him or her. No matter what that feeling is. And so, rather than pulling back the tendrils of our mind, let's just feel, as we often do, the energy of the sun come down through our crown, our branches as if we were a tree, down into and through our trunk. And just ground, because that's really the way. Feeling that energy going down into Mother Earth. To get that energy from being stuck in our heads and get it flowing again is to ground. And then feel that energy come back up from the core of Mother Earth, through our roots, into our trunks. And then feel it beginning to flow. It does flow into our heads, but then it keeps going down and throughout our whole bodies. Forgive my phone noise. Just observe it, let it go. Sorry. Breathe to help that energy continue flowing. And once it starts flowing more freely, you can feel the energy in all parts of your body at the same time, because the core of your being has now expanded to encompass all of you, and then you can grow it. That love can flow throughout your whole body. Once you open your mind, open your heart, let that energy flow throughout your whole body, then it can really grow and you can send it out without expectation, just because it feels good to expand. Sending out love and acceptance to others as well who need it. Observing that we all have different paths. Recognizing that we can find our own paths and we can allow others to have theirs. And that sending out that love and acceptance, no matter what, is the thing that will help everyone, including ourselves, the most. One last deep breath. Thank you so much for joining me. Namaste, beloveds. If you liked this message, give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to be notified when the new weekly message comes out, subscribe and hit the bell button. You can also find me on Facebook at my page, Amy Caryn Johnson Earth Channel, or my group, Earth Tree Sun. And if you'd like these messages emailed to you for free on Wednesdays, you can sign up at amycarynjohnson.com. Thank you.